Today on CityCast Austin, y'all, the Texas Democrats have fled town and they are trying as hard as they can to keep the Texas House from adopting new congressional district maps. But how long can they stay gone? And can Governor Greg Abbott really remove them from office like he's threatening? Is it inevitable that Texas will give President Trump these 5 GOP seats that he really wants? And why should you even care? I'm here with an expert on Texas politics to get into it all. It's Tuesday, August 5th. I'm Eva Ruth Moravec, and this is what Austin's talking about. Hello, I'm here with Scott Braddock, editor of the Quorum Report, who keeps a very close eye on the Texas legislature at all times. Howdy, Scott.
How are you?
So we are recording this late Monday, just hours after the House Democrats left town and broke quorum, or with the intent to break quorum. Later today, they are theoretically due back in Austin to vote on redistricting, but you have declared the special session is now over. So what makes you so sure that they are not coming back between now and August 18th?
I just don't see any chance of it, and there are several reasons for that. Folks might point to the quorum break from a few years ago in 2021 that was not effective in the estimation of most folks. That you know, the thing that they were trying to stop last time was an elections bill that was very specific to Texas, and it ended up passing anyway when the Democrats returned. But there's some differences now. Number one, this is a national power struggle, which means national resources are now flowing to Texas Democratic legislators. You had just last week, the U.S. House Minority Leader, the Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries, he did basically a pep rally for the Democrats here. I was first to report at quorumreport.com that Leader Jeffries, former Attorney General Eric Holder, the DNC chairman himself, Ken Martin, these national Democratic leaders are backing up the Democrats here, supporting them. And this is an effort that is expensive. It will cost as much as $1 million per week for travel expenses, for their lodging, and also for the fines that have to be paid by each of these legislators. It's, get this, Eva Ruth, it's $500 per day is the fine that's in the Texas House rules for being absent with the intent of impeding the House's business. If you do the math on that real fast, that's $15,000 a month. And everybody assumes that all politicians are wealthy, but there's one member of the Democratic caucus who doesn't even have cable at home. And I did talk to one of the wealthy members who said that they thought that $15,000 is kind of steep, right? So if the rich ones are thinking that, the others are, going to have a problem paying it on their own.
Yeah.
But they're going to have all kinds of support on this. And of course, you already see Republicans and Democrats doing a lot of fundraising on this. And, the real battle is ahead.
So you said $1 million per week. Was that right? And
easily.
I think I saw a headline in the past couple of weeks that there was like 20 million that they've already raised. Do you know what is their war chest like and where is it coming from at this point?
So there's a couple things going on. That headline you're talking about, I think, is the one that was a fundraising goal of National Democrats to raise money for congressional races in Texas next year, because we will, under this map, we'll see some more competitive races in the state between Republicans and Democrats. And $20 million spread across several congressional districts probably doesn't go as far as a lot of people would think. Sounds like a lot of money to you and me, but for one side in one of those races, they can spend as much as $10 million to $15 million, something like that. For this effort, the entire thing to last at least a month to 6 weeks, something like that, for the Democrats to be in another state where Texas law enforcement has no jurisdiction, which is why they are there, because, and we can get to this if you like, the Speaker of the House might send law enforcement to go find them. It's going to cost something like $4.5 million to be out of Texas to try to delay the implementation of these maps in such a way that they can create leverage to potentially get the maps changed. And I think that's really what the game is here.
That's the long game. So you're saying 6 weeks or something. I mean, we know August 18th is as long as this first special session could last. Of course, Governor Greg Abbott could immediately call legislators back for another one. How long do you think that they can stay gone? And not just meaning logistically with families and all their other responsibilities and all of that. But last time in 2021, when there was a quorum break, it ended because they were not unified in their length of time staying away, right? So what's your thinking on how long they can stay unified and essentially just delay this, because it seems inevitable eventually?
Interesting on a couple of levels. Number one, I'll tell you a quick story from 2021. I was at a cigar industry convention in Las Vegas when the Democrat, of course, it's almost as if they check my personal calendar to then do this big
How
thing.
Convenient for you.
And so I had to leave Las Vegas, head to Washington, D.C., where these Democrats had fled to break quorum. And I think I got there the second day that they were all in the same hotel in D.C., staying away from the Texas Capitol. And 2 days into it, they were already miserable, fighting with each other. I thought maybe mentally and emotionally, they probably have enough gas in the tank to do this for about 2 weeks.
Right.
Well, I was wrong. They stayed away for about a month, and then quorum was reestablished in the Texas House, and things moved forward. There are some things that are different. At that time, bars and restaurants weren't even open in Washington, so it was extra miserable. They were having to, this is just the real human stories of how this stuff unfolds. They were having to get takeout and take it to their hotel rooms because restaurants weren't open. It was that miserable. That's not the case now. I mean, they're in Chicago. They're in what I'm told is not the nicest hotel ever, but a decent hotel. Think of it like they're at camp, right? They've got the female legislators on one floor and the male legislators on a different floor, right? So they're segregated that way. And
they're also in like Chicago. So they're in Chicago, Albany, and Boston, right?
Mm-hmm. Some of them were in Boston for the National Conference of State Legislators. Some of them were going to be there this past weekend anyway because some of the Houston members were there because the Astros were playing against the Boston Red Sox. So they went to that game, and that series didn't work out for us, by the way, over the weekend. But
so sorry.
I know. But the fact is, when you talk about these things, it would be easy for folks to think that all Democrats would just be unified because they're all Democrats. But they're just all people also. Everybody has their own idiosyncrasies, and people get sick of each other when they're stuck in the same place together. I was describing it this way for a freshman Democrat the other day, that because they were talking about how surreal it was going to be to leave the state, to have all these headlines, to be in the national spotlight, and have everybody talking right now about how they're leaving the state to stop this, this Trump takeover of Texas is the way they're putting it with this congressional map. And I said, yeah, but here comes the next part, is that it's going to be a little bit like being stuck in an elevator with a whole lot of people, and you like some of them and you don't like the others. And they really have to stick together for this to have any kind of real world effect. Now, to the other part of your question, what can really be done here? I mean, if the Democrats come back at a certain point, that map will just pass, right? But here is what I think could play out. And it's my understanding that some of the national Democratic contributors, the billionaires who are going to be underwriting, this effort by the Democrats.
Names here,
that
Scott.
there are folks. Well, there are. I don't even know what some of the names are.
Okay.
But there are folks who are bought into this at the national level, which is this: there comes a point on the calendar, and I'm talking about in August. Not later in the year, later this month, there comes a point at which county elections administrators around the state really need to know what these maps are going to look like so that we can have elections that run on time next year. Mm-hmm. There is the possibility, and this is down in the weeds, but it's important, there's the possibility that the Republican and Democratic primaries, which usually unfold in March, and this has happened in redistricting fights before, that those primaries could be delayed. And when that happens, it gives a leg up to challengers in primaries. So if you're a Republican legislator right now, you're an incumbent, and you have the possibility of your primary being delayed, that's one way for a GOP challenger to beat you. So Republicans in the legislature don't want their primary to be delayed. I mean, that's exactly how Senator Ted Cruz beat David Dewhurst, who was the sitting lieutenant governor at the time back in 2012. There was a delayed primary because of a redistricting fight in 2011. Republicans don't want that to happen. So if they start to feel the threat that their own elections are going to be screwed up because this is getting delayed, then there might be a proposal from Republican leadership here in Austin where they might say to the Democrats, hey, look, we started out with a map that would change up to 5 congressional seats, but we might come back at you now and say, hey, let's do a map that only changes 2 to 2 new Republican seats, something like that. That might get the Democrats to stop breaking quorum, come on back to Austin. They would still vote against the map, but they would be present for the vote.
Saturday morning is my favorite day of the week. It's the day I get to sleep in and lounge. And let me tell you, since I've gotten the Cozy Earth sheets, relaxing has become one of my favorite pastimes. Now, I've talked a lot about how the temperature regulating sheets guarantee you a comfortable night's sleep, but they're also great for summer mornings when you're just not quite ready to get out of bed and face the hot day. Now, of course, I have to mention you can grab some sheets risk-free with the Cozy Earth 100-night sleep trial. And if you try them and you don't love them, you can return them hassle-free. But I don't think you're going to want to. So head to CozyEarth.com, use my code, CozyAustin, for 40% off. And if you get a post-purchase survey, make sure you let them know you heard about Cozy Earth right here. Because your bed should be more than a place to sleep. It should be your happy place. Cozy Earth makes that possible.
Okay, and I want to get more into the actual map. But before that, I just want to bring up, the fact that Republicans at this point are not very happy. Governor Abbott has threatened to remove them all from office, all of these fleeing Dems from office, and have them replaced. And he's also suggested that, accepting donations for that $500 a day fine amounts to a form of bribery. Mm-hmm. It seems like from your posts, you don't really align in your thinking here with the governor. What are you making of all of these threats?
Here's the thing. There is a process through which someone who's in one of these offices can be declared to have abandoned the office. But there are some facts that are not true right now, which is the person would have to be, abandoning the office for a long period of time. These folks just went to Chicago yesterday. They're also not abandoning their offices at all, because what you're doing through a quorum break is a legislative tactic. So they actually are legislating by being in Chicago. Mm-hmm, they're delaying action by the House, right? So that's an argument.
And they're having constant press conferences and talking to the media and doing all that. Yeah.
So, I mean, the thing is, when I see headlines from very well-meaning and respected journalists that say things like, and this was all the headlines, right? Yeah. They all say something like, they flee the state well, I mean, that's one way that you could say it. You could also just say they're breaking quorum, which is a legislative tactic. They're doing something that actually has an effect at the Capitol, even though they're not physically there. Right. So they are legislating by doing it. So when the governor says that, he's reaching a little bit, legally. The other thing about bribery, I mean, this, you've covered Texas politics for some time. Here's the deal. Corruption is out in the open in Texas. I don't remember the governor having any concerns about corruption when the little governor, Dan Patrick, took a $3 million contribution from Ken Paxton supporters right before Patrick was the presiding judge in the impeachment trial a couple of years ago. You remember that? I don't remember even any Democrats saying that the governor was being bribed by a school voucher supporter from Pennsylvania who gave him a single check for $6 million to try to get him to pass school vouchers in the state. So, look, if a much smaller amount of cash was found in a congressman's freezer in New Orleans, someone would go to prison. That's because they view corruption a little bit differently in some other places. But around here, it's just out in the open. And so when people start to say, so-and-so was bribed or this person is corrupt, you could probably hear my eyes rolling. You can hear my eyes rolling, dear listener, from where you are.
I know that you called those things out, I remember, if I'm remembering my quorum report reading correctly.
That's fair that I did point them out, but I never said they were bribes.
Right. Okay, so he's making these threats. Mm-hmm. Republicans here are pissed, but they're really just kind of spinning their wheels because the deal with quorum is there are 150 members in the House. They need at least 2/3 to vote on anything, to get anything done. So it's a quorum break until they have that 2/3 there. And there are 62 Democrats. And do we know if all of them are gone, or what's the total number?
No, it's my understanding, and this number will change as we go. By the time folks are listening to this on Tuesday morning, the number may change some. It's my understanding that on Sunday, when those Democrats got on the plane for Chicago, there were 56 of them, something like that. Okay. So more than the number needed to break quorum, which is 51. If there are 100 members in the House, there is a quorum and business can be conducted. And it's important to point out that, in the afternoon today, as we record on Monday, if there's not 100 people on the floor, not 100 members, then committees can't even do any work after that. And what we might see is the Speaker may initiate the process of trying to bring members back to the Capitol. So there are some of these legislators who went to Chicago, about 55, 57 of them, something like that. But there are probably also some Democrats who are in Houston or in South Texas. And if they are at their offices or their homes, law enforcement, and that would be the House sergeants, and the Texas Department of Public Safety, state troopers, they can be empowered by the Speaker of the House to go round them up and bring them back. People were asking me about whether they'll be arrested.
Yeah.
And whether you would see pictures of legislators in handcuffs.
In handcuffs.
If they don't want to, that can happen. You might see pictures like that. You might say,
but it's more of like a detention or like a escort.
What would happen is, it's more of an escort. What would happen is they would bring legislators back from Houston or South Texas or San Antonio or wherever. They would bring them back, and then they would bring them to the House chamber. And at that point, the speaker can lock the doors and keep them in there. And so I remember in the 2021 quorum break, there was some talk about what in politics, you always hear the term, the optics. What does all this look like?
Yes.
What would the optics be if you had black and brown legislators locked in the House chamber, banging on the door and saying, let us out of here? What would that look like? And some cynics in the Democratic Party and Republican Party were saying, well, that'd be a pretty good fundraising video.
It's great for commercials.
A lot of, and you already see a lot of fundraising going on around this, as you mentioned,
yes.
Which the governor's, acting like it's bribery. But yes,
But in reality, what that looks like, what quorum break usually looks like, is the speaker trying to gavel in every day, counting how many members are there, and then, giving them passes is what I remember from 2021, is they basically got a day pass to, skip for the rest of the day and come back the next day.
Republican legislators are going to pretend that they're here in Austin working when they actually can't conduct any legislative business. So what they'll do is they'll be on the floor each day for maybe just a few minutes. And then the rest of the time, they'll go do other stuff. They'll go play golf or, ride their boat out on Lake Travis or whatever it is. And then give everybody the sense that, hey, we're in Austin, ready to work as soon as the Democrats come back. Now, I should say this. There's more than one way for the speaker to lure legislators back or to force them to come back to Austin. In the 2021 quorum break, there was a moment where House sergeants went around the state looking to see if there was anyone who was still here in Texas, any Democrats who were not in Austin. There were a lot of videos of this. You can probably still find them. The House sergeant at the time, a guy named Michael Black, very nice, going around the state, knocking on doors and just asking if folks were around. There's the possibility of law enforcement getting these folks and bringing them back to Austin, as we mentioned. But there's also, it's not just sticks. They can also use carrots, and they can use a different kind of stick. So, for example, the speaker, he has the cell phone numbers of these Democrats who are in Chicago, and he can call them up and say, hey, how right now you have this vice chairmanship? Maybe you won't have that if you don't come back. Or maybe he calls one and says, hey, would you like a vice chairmanship?
Right.
Would you like to come on back to Austin? I mean, he can do various things in trying to get these legislators to come back. After the quorum break in 2021, it did not go unnoticed by me that in the next legislative session, some of those Democrats who were the holdouts who stayed in Washington longer during the quorum break, some of them were the ones who didn't have chairmanships the next time around when those were appointed by the same speaker, Dade Phelan, at that time. So there are different ways that this can happen, that the speaker can try to work with those members to get them back in Austin.
And they had to leave the actual state and go to a Democrat stronghold where they could be, obviously Texas DPS doesn't have jurisdiction outside of the state of Texas, and Governor Abbott can't force someone, outside of the state to be arrested by another state's law enforcement or something. But they're being safe in where they are and knowing that they have some cover.
I know that in the discussions that Democrats had over the last few weeks about whether they would break quorum, the term they were using was sanctuary state.
Right.
They could go to a state where there's a Democratic governor and they would feel relatively safe. Now, there's something that's very different now when you compare this situation to past quorum breaks, going back to 2003, when you had Democrats go to Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And that only lasted for a day or two, by the way. People think that went on for a long time. When they went to D.C. in 2021.
It looked fun.
A friend of mine who was a reporter at the Dallas Morning News at the time, shout out to Matt Stiles. He worked at the Texas Tribune later. Matt was the one who got the tip. He worked at the DMN, and he got the tip that they were up in Ardmore, and he found them before anybody else.
Nice. And
when he showed up in the lobby at the Holiday Inn in Ardmore, some of the Democrats didn't believe he was a reporter. They thought that he was a Republican operative, and they tried to run him off. But when you look at what's been described as a redistricting's arms race is what's happening around the country now.
Yes.
With Texas going through this process that we're talking about, something that wasn't true at all in 2003 when it was a mid-decade redistricting. At that time, you didn't have governors of other states saying, hey, if you redistrict your state, I'll redistrict mine.
Right.
But now you have Governor Newsom in California saying that. You've got Governor Pritzker saying a version of that. You've got the governor in New York saying a version of that. And that wasn't, I mean, if Texas is going to add 5 new seats in Congress for Republicans, there are even some Republicans who will privately say, well, what's the point of that if Governor Newsom's going to add 7 out in California? Why are we even going through this? Why are we doing this? And I would say that the other thing that is different is at that time in 2003, the U.S. House Majority Leader, Tom DeLay, a Republican from Sugar Land, Texas, was accused, and this part of it was a scandal at the time. He was accused of enlisting the help of the FAA to try to help Republicans figure out where Democrats had gone when they broke quorum, because they went to 2 places. House Democrats went to Ardmore, Oklahoma, and the Senate Democrats broke quorum for a little while too. People forget about that. They went to New Mexico. At that time, it was scandalous that the federal government, an agency of the federal government, had been enlisted by Republican leadership to find these people. I don't know that would be the same sort of scandal if President Trump gets involved in this and tries to send federal law enforcement to go find, I think that's something to go find them. I think that's something that people should be watching out for, that's a very real possibility.
Even if they're in these sanctuary cities or states, they're still unknown. This administration
has been known for ignoring the norms, right? And so this is the kind of thing we're going to look for. Does the Trump administration get involved directly? And look, then the president sees this as existential. My reporting and the reporting of others has been that Mr. Trump and the people right around him do believe that if Democrats take the majority in the U.S. House next year in that election, then the last 2 years of his presidency essentially his administration will be shut down. He'll be under constant investigation. That he'll probably be impeached again if Hakeem Jeffries is the Speaker of the House. And Trump doesn't want to operate that way. He doesn't want for his presidency to be over for the last 2 years of his second term. And that's why they're going to war like this. And this response from Texas House Democrats, while folks here right now are thinking, wow, this is the nuclear option, they're going all out, it's in response to a really aggressive remake of the politics of our state and our congressional delegation through the map that we're talking about.
Okay, so let's get into these maps. One thing that I've really been curious about is, Trump says that he's just been very obvious about it and very out in the open, right? He said the quiet part out loud, bring me these 5 seats. Right. And yet here in this most recent House hearing, kept hearing from Republicans who were upset that they were being called racist, and said that, these maps were drawn by a law firm, and we're not racist. It's actually just voters are voters. So how do you explain to people, how do these maps take race and ethnicity into account in Texas?
Well, Republicans will argue smartly that after certain parts of the Voting Rights Act were gutted by the Supreme Court a few years back, that they are allowed to draw these maps based solely on politics. And the deal is when you're talking about partisanship and race and ethnicity, it has been, and this gets a little complicated, but I mean, we're talking redistricting here. Very often, ethnicity and race can be a proxy for partisanship. If you look at the way that the different groups will traditionally vote, some voting for Democrats, some voting for Republicans, one of the complicating factors is the Latino vote, where you've had so many more Latinos voting for Republicans. And so let's talk about the Valley in South Texas for just a minute.
Especially in this most recent election with Trump, I think that a lot of people were surprised by some of the votes that people, the minorities that voted for Trump.
Well, so in South Texas is the example. So if you look at the Rio Grande Valley and the counties that are there and the counties that are just north of there, you're talking mostly about Latino voters. But that is not the demographic. The Latinos are not the demographic that's necessarily being won in bigger percentages by Republicans. The demographic that's being won more by Republicans is rural voters who happen to be Latino. So if you look at the way that the districts are drawn for some state house seats in South Texas, for example, you'll have areas that are almost all Latino, but some are more urban and some are more rural. And so those districts are drawn in such a way that one of the state house seats, for example, takes in a little bit of Harlingen, a little bit of Brownsville, and then the rest of the district is all rural out in the country.
See.
So it really is that rural Latinos are much more likely to vote for a Republican when they have been spoken to by Republicans. And over the last decade, there is one campaign that has made a concerted effort to really reach out to Latinos who are in rural areas in the Valley. And that's the Greg Abbott campaign. Going back to his campaign in 2014, he spent millions of dollars in the Valley, which had traditionally voted for Democrats, even though they're more conservative Democrats. They were making this outreach effort, a priority for the Republican Party in Texas. So when Trump started to win down in the Valley, it wasn't necessarily because Trump did so much better.
Oh, because Abbott had already...
That's right. I grew up on a farm. They were planting seeds 10 years ago, and guess what? Those crops are coming up now. And so, if you look at that work that has been done, that now sets the stage for a redistricting in which you can change the congressional lines down in South Texas such that you can now create seats that would probably elect a Republican. Now, if you also look at minorities who run as Republicans, Wes Hunt is an African-American Republican congressman from Houston. And of course, we have plenty of Latinos now running as Republicans and winning as Republicans. Ryan Guillen in South Texas, he was a party switcher. He was a Democrat, and now he's a Republican. If you have these arguments, legal arguments that are made in court about minorities being able to elect a candidate of their choice, it just becomes harder, not just from a PR standpoint, but also a legal standpoint. If you go into court and say minorities aren't getting a chance to elect, the person of their choice, and you're a Democrat trying to make that argument, when there are people of color who are in office who are Republicans.
Right.
The Republican attorneys will say, well, what about that? and courts have been responsive to that. So if you look at the way that this map has been redrawn, if you want to talk about the way that the lines have been shifted up here in Central Texas.
Yeah, take us to Austin.
Yeah, look at the fact that you have a longtime veteran and also progressive congressman in Lloyd Doggett. You don't get much more liberal than Lloyd Doggett, although Greg Casar might have something to say about that if they end up in a primary together, and that might happen,
right?
Because what has happened in Austin is what they've always done with Austin when Republicans are drawing the lines around here. This is a big progressive county and city, and so what ends up happening with these congressional districts is you take some of the people who are in that big liberal city, and you basically take their neighborhood and this is the way that some of these attorneys have described it, you take their neighborhood and you sink their neighborhood into a much larger area that's all rural, right? So that those rural voters will drown out the people in the city.
Right.
And so that's what's happening with a bunch of these districts around here. It ends up creating only one opportunity for a Democrat to pick up a seat around here, being the one that you might have Lloyd Doggett, who I think
or Greg Casar, and they're both progressive, but they are very different progressives, I think.
Yeah, and for Doggett, I was going to say that I think this is right. If I remember the numbers, more than 70% of the folks who were already in the district that he represents now would be in this new district. So Casar is really the one who I think, he would have to make a big decision on this. I know that Casar has not been able to raise the kind of money that Lloyd Doggett has in the bank. I think Congressman Doggett has something like $6 million in his account. And even though Congressman Casar has been one of those progressives who sort of runs with the AOC and Jasmine Crockett crowd, but those two women have been really beating him for fundraising.
Right.
He hasn't been able to perform that way, and we'll see if he does. Now, he could also try to run in one of these seats that's drawn to elect a Republican, but that would probably be a fool's errand, or maybe somebody could talk Congressman Doggett into retiring. We'll see. All of those are things to watch for, right, in this environment, because a lot's going to change potentially under this map.
But in the other districts that Austin has now been drawn into, we're talking about like West Austin being connected all the way to East Texas to the Big Thicket, out to the Big Thicket, and College Station is included in that. I guess that's kind of the rural sinking that you're thinking about.
Absolutely. Under the map that we live under right now, areas in West Dallas County, like Irving, for example, where there's a large minority population, a lot of Latinos who are there in that area. The district that they're in now stretches all the way over to Jacksonville, which is 3 hours away. That's the same thing. It's taking those minority communities, those minority neighborhoods, and using white rural voters mostly to drown out those people of color and dilute their vote. And it all got a little trickier, but it gave the Republicans a freer hand to do this when the courts weighed in a few years ago on the question of redistricting and said that if you're doing it for purely partisan reasons, then it's okay.
Okay.
What's still illegal under the Voting Rights Act is doing it for racial reasons. So you would have to show in court that you did this in almost you'd have to go so far as to say intentionally to drown out the voices of those minority communities. Republicans will make the argument, we're not doing that. We're just optimizing this for
partisan
Republicans.
Reasons.
And that's why you heard Republicans say that over and over again in that hearing the other day.
I see.
We're just doing this for partisan reasons.
They're all trying to set their legal record now and get things out in the open. Yeah.
Now where the Republicans might be getting too cute with this is that they're drawing these lines based on the 2024 presidential election. And I don't think I'm breaking any news to Democrats right now when I say that was a pretty bad election for y'all.
Oh, yeah.
And I know a lot of listeners will say, for those Democrats listening will say, yeah, it didn't go great.
Just a little.
It really was, for Democrats, it was a historic collapse of the party here in Texas and all around the country because of the way that the election played out with, switching President Biden out and putting Vice President Harris in. And there's been a lot written and said about that. But the election result ended up being that the American people didn't buy that. I would simply suggest to Democrats that the next time around, if you're going to pick a presidential nominee, you might bother asking Democratic voters who it ought to be. That'd be the only thing I'd say about that. But if Republicans are drawing these lines based on those numbers from that election, that's probably the equivalent of Democrats around here thinking that the 2018 election, which was historically good for Democrats here, that's some kind of a new baseline.
That's the norm.
But it's not. We haven't seen that repeated since 2018.
Oh,
right?
So some of these districts that are assumed to be very Republican may not actually be.
Right. So when you're looking at that map and you hear people use the phrase, well, this could result in up to 5 new Republicans in Congress from Texas.
Right.
When I look at that map, I think, well, maybe not. Maybe it's really only 4. And maybe it's only 3, depending on how this election goes. And that's one of the reasons that you heard Republican legislators in this process, including the former redistricting chairman, Todd Hunter, say that, look, the way the election goes is still up to the candidates and the voters. We can draw these lines and we can do our best. And he's making the argument, like you said, he's making the argument that this is probably the best scenario that they can come up with for Republicans, that they want to, draw a map that President Trump is going to like because, supposedly it's going to elect more Republicans. But at the end of the day, it's still the case that whoever runs for those seats has to do a good job of winning votes. And that's the kind of thing that we'll see play out if these maps go in effect.
It is hard to kind of look at these maps just as say nothing about any of this and just make sense of them, because of the shapes of some of these districts. How would you describe some of the shapes of the districts, particularly in Austin? Well,
someone said that because of some of the what look like protuberances from them, that it is really easy to say that some people are really getting screwed here, right?
Right.
That's one way to look at it. Look, the term communities of interest gets thrown around a lot, and Republicans and Democrats just look at that differently. So Democrats, and I would say a lot of moderates, would look at it this way. They would say Austin and Travis County is a community of interest for a variety of reasons. It's a city, it's a county. It's not just that it's progressive and generally, an area that's favorable to Democrats, but people who live here, just like people who would live in Houston, would have common interests, right? Similar needs for education, infrastructure, and those big infrastructure things like, roads and water. When it comes to federal funding and things like that, healthcare needs, all of that, we're in a community of interest, right? Republicans might look at it and say, what a community of interest is to us is an area that is full of Republicans. So it wouldn't have to necessarily be defined by city boundaries or county boundaries. They would go look for where Republicans. They would go look for where Republicans live, and say a community of interest is people who agree with us on issues. They would say, it's that we have a certain understanding of what the role of the federal government and state government is. We agree that President Trump's quote unquote America First agenda is the right way to go, and all of that. And I will say it's interesting to watch, Governor Abbott weigh in on this now. To watch legislators weigh on this, they're tweeting nonstop about how they're going to, send more Republicans to Congress from Texas, and it used to be the case that with redistricting, it was like the movie Fight Club for Republicans. The first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. They would never talk about redistricting at all. They would just do it. In the era of Trump, that's over with. You have the president himself, as you mentioned, the president himself weighing in, telling Republicans, you got to do this for me. And Republicans tweeting it out. We're going to do this for President Trump. We got to win this for him. And that's why you also have Republicans now saying that their Democratic colleagues ought to be arrested and having their chairmanships taken away from them and all of that. It's an all-out war, and the stakes couldn't be higher.
Yeah. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. Like you said, we could see Democratic governors in other states try to draw new districts for Democrats. We could, these 5 Republican or quote unquote Republican districts in Texas might not even pan out. Who knows? One last thing that I wanted to ask you about is, there's some thinking that, with the beginning of the special session when it was called, right, there are 18 things on the call. And the list seemed to have some very important items. I mean, THC regulation of that was a huge issue during the session. Then we had the catastrophic flooding, killing 130 Texans. There were lots of calls for fixing that. There's property tax relief. Like, there are all these other things. And some people might think, oh, well, that's great leverage for Republicans to have over Democrats. Like, hey, come back and get this other stuff done. But, the more that I think about this, it just seems like all those other issues may have just been BS in order to get lawmakers there to do redistricting. I mean, is that the way that we should be thinking about this, that these other issues were just collateral damage?
I do think that the THC ban that was, passed with Lieutenant Governor Patrick just twisting
throwing
all the arms
gummies at everyone,
throwing snacks at people, twisting arms of legislators, getting a ban passed that the governor did not agree with, that he vetoed. I did think that was possibly going to be a special session item, mostly because of the lobbying that's happening on that issue. It's a huge business fight between the pot growers and the hemp growers. They're fighting with each other. You've got the alcohol industry divided on it. The liquor stores like it, and the beer distributors don't like it, which you'd almost never see the alcohol industry divided. So I thought that potentially that was going to be something that would end up as a legitimate issue. I'll say something that might be a little controversial about the Hill Country flooding. I think that people in Brownsville, Corpus Christi, Houston, and Beaumont might want to have a word about the fact that there's never been a special session to respond to a hurricane, ever. We don't do that. In Texas, we have not done that.
Or the freeze, Uri.
And the freeze, there was not a special session, but we were in a regular session when the freeze happened.
True.
And then during the next 2 regular sessions, there was a lot of legislation to try to deal with the electricity grid, right? But you're right to point out that there was nothing special was done after that freeze. I'll say it this way. This has been the Republican argument about that. When Democrats would call for a special session after the massacre in Uvalde or after a hurricane in Houston, which there was one just last year, which was a disaster. Remember, it killed lots of people and 3 million people didn't have power for 6 weeks or more, something like that in the Houston area, but there was no special session about that. Republicans would say, they would traditionally argue that you don't want to legislate and create new policy prescriptions right after a natural disaster or while it's still happening, because you want cooler heads to prevail and you want good decisions to be made after we have all the after action reports and all of that. You want to wait a few months to the regular session, and then you can make decisions about how to prepare for these things and how to respond to them, going forward. And that's really what the legislature can do. When it comes to the immediate response and getting relief to the victims, that most of that comes through the federal government.
They can do that, and they can do that without a session, right? I mean, whatever the governor needs to sign. Or
billions of dollars has been moved to border security without the legislature weighing in on that previously, right? So they have mechanisms to do that. But again, most of the immediate relief comes from the feds anyway. And so all of that to say that if Republicans are attacking Democrats for not wanting to address the flooding, it's good politics, but that's what it is. It'll be effective politics if they flog them with that, but that is what it is. And, I watched the hearing last
that's
week
the hardest part, is to think that these people who have been through a lot are getting this opportunity to talk about what happened to them. And it seems all well and good and real. And then to be kind of, reduced to, I don't want to say pawns. I don't want to be too harsh, but like, if that's what it comes down to, that's pretty awful.
Well,
Prolific,
as I said, it's effective politics, and politics in Texas is a full contact sport. It's not for the squeamish,
Well, that's a good note to end on. Anything else we should be keeping an eye on besides the quorum report and your very prolific Twitter feed?
If you look at those things, you will also soon see an announcement of a launch of not just one new show, but several new shows. And so watch quorumreport.com. That announcement will be coming real soon.
That's all for today here on CityCast Austin. You can find links to Scott's work and his social media in our show notes. And hey, if you enjoy the show, please tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our amazing Hey Austin newsletter. And don't forget, you can support the show and get really cool perks by becoming a CityCast Austin neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye, y'all.